صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم ولا تطغوا فيه فيحل عليكم غضبي ومن يحلل عليه غضبي فقد هوى وإني لغفار لمن تاب وآمن وعمل صالحا ثم اهتدى. وما أعجلك عن قومك يا موسى؟ قال هم أولئك على أثري وعجلت إليك رب لترضى. قال فإنا قد فتنا قومك من بعدك وأضلهم السامري. فرجع موسى إلى قومه غضبان أسفا قال يا قوم ألم يعدكم ربكم وعدا حسنا أفطال عليكم العهد أم أردتم أن يحل عليكم غضب من ربكم فأخلفتم موعدي؟ قالوا ما أخلفنا موعدك بملكنا ولكننا حملنا أوزارا من زينة القوم فقذفناها فكذلك ألقى السامري. فأخرج لهم عجلا جسدا له خوار فقالوا هذا إلهكم وإله موسى فنسي. أفلا يرون ألا يرجع إليهم قولا ولا يملك لهم ضرا ولا نفعا؟ ولقد قال لهم هارون من قبل يا قوم إنما فتنتم به وإن ربكم الرحمن فاتبعوني وأطيعوا أمري. قالوا لن نبرح عليه عاكفين حتى يرجع إلينا موسى. قال يا هارون ما منعك إذ رأيتهم ضلوا ألا تتبعني أفعصيت أمري؟ قال يا ابن أم لا تأخذ بلحيتي ولا برأسي إني خشيت أن تقول فرقت بين بني إسرائيل ولم ترقب قولي. قال فما خطبك يا سامري؟ قال بصرت بما لم يبصروا به فقبضت قبضة من أثر الرسول فنبذتها وكذلك سولت لي نفسي. قال فاذهب فإن لك في الحياة أن تقول لا مساس وإن لك موعدا لن تخلفه وانظر إلى إلهك الذي ظلت عليه عاكفا لنحرقنه ثم لننسفنه في اليم نسفا. إنما إلهكم الله الذي لا إله إلا هو وسع كل شيء علما. كذلك نقص عليك من أنباء ما قد سبق وقد آتيناك من لدنا ذكرا. من أعرض عنه فإنه يحمل يوم القيامة وزرا خالدين فيه وساء لهم يوم القيامة حملا يوم ينفخ في الصور ونحشر المجرمين يومئذ زرقا يتخافتون بينهم إن لبثتم إلا عشرا نحن أعلم بما يقولون إذ يقول أمثلهم طريقة إن لبثتم إلا يوما ويسألونك عن الجبال فقل ينسفها ربي نسفا فيذرها قاعا صفصفا لا ترى فيها عوجا ولا أمتا يومئذ يتبعون الداعي لا عوج له وخشعت الأصوات للرحمن فلا تسمع إلا همسا يومئذ لا تنفع الشفاعة إلا من أذن له الرحمن ورضي له قولا صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thanks, Brother Allah, for this beautiful recitation. MashaAllah, came of our community. And if you guys want to show support for this beautiful man and his, MashaAllah, beautiful initiative, more than happy to contact him and see what you guys can do with regards to Dar Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam. Inshallah, now we'll be moving on to our main segments, where we'll be having Dr. Sama Hadad really enlighten us regarding what allows us to reach the good life. So let us welcome her. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Brothers and sisters, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Brothers and sisters, it's wonderful to be here face to face for a change. Alhamdulillah. I'd like to thank the Barakah Programs team for inviting me to be with you this evening. So we're going to be exploring together what constitutes the good life. So what is the good life? Is it a whole stash of money? Is it a really nice racing car or a fast car? Is it all the food that you can possibly think of wanting to eat? Is it awesome holiday destinations? Or is it all the gaming that you could possibly do all day and all night? Is it one of these? Is it all of these? We'll explore that tonight. My inspiration for this talk is actually my work. I am a GP, but I work in aged care. And invariably, because of the nature of the job, I do face a lot of patients passing away. And I often find myself, when I'm consoling the members of the deceased's family, they often say, oh, he had a good life, or she had a good life. And obviously it's not appropriate for me to ask them to elaborate, but in some instances they elaborate themselves. And you get things like, oh, they had so many years after retirement, they explored so many countries, they were able to do all the leisurely activities that they could. And so I found myself pondering, what really is the good life? Wouldn't it be great if we had a manual that gave us like a step-by-step explanation and instructions as to how we go about achieving this good life? And really, we're not the first to have pondered this. This has been an age-old question, and back in ancient Greece, they couldn't find a manual that could tell them what is a good life, and so they came up with their own theories. One of the concepts, which is not new to us, but it was back then, is what's called hedonism. And hedonism basically is seeking pleasures for pleasure's sake. So it was initially brought about by a guy called Aristippus of Cyrene, and so the Cyrenaics basically said pleasure was the ultimate goal, and everyone should be aiming to pursue immediate pleasures for themselves. And because we can't really guarantee how long we're going to be around for, we better do it quick. So, immediate pleasures. And of course, it's not, we hear that a lot these days, don't we? YOLO, you only live once. Well, it's a very ancient concept. So pleasures equaling the ultimate good is what hedonism is all about. And a little while later, a guy called Epicurus adjusted this, because it just sounded real bad, didn't it? Just go all out to get all the pleasures that you can immediately. And he tried to tweak it and twist it so that it's more palatable. And so he basically said, he confirmed, look, if you look at babies, you see that all they want is pleasures, and all they want to avoid is pain. And so our nature must be just that. And therefore happiness must mean that we must pursue pleasures and avoid pain at all cost. He did elaborate and describe things like kinetic pleasures versus katastematic pleasures. So kinetic is like the active, as you're eating the chocolate cake and tasting it, that's kinetic pleasure. But once you've finished eating the cake, you've got katastematic pleasure in being completely satisfied. But at the end of the day, it was what it was, which is trying to attain as many bodily pleasures as one can. And you find that atheists gravitate towards this philosophy. And in fact, Epicurus was of the belief that the biggest cause of pain and anxiety is actually people fearing God and fearing death. And so if we are to say that there is no God and there is no death, then we would say that the body and the soul both are annihilated at death. And so we would not have, the living wouldn't have any problem with thinking about death, and the dead would not have a problem about the concept of death. the concept of hedonism kind of died down, and then it was picked up again around the 18th century by a guy called Jeremy Bentham, and he elaborated further into like prudential hedonism, and from his concepts, the hedonistic utilitarianism was born. And what utilitarianism basically says is that actions in of themselves are not actually good or bad, but what eventuates from these actions, the results of these, should be maximum happiness. And if we get an action that will result in the maximum happiness, then that is exactly what we should be aiming for. But then a guy by the name of Thomas Carlyle came around and he said, well, look, this concept, it just sounds like it's a philosophy, quote, fit for swine. So we are aiming to please and gain all the bodily pleasures that we want. How are we any different from a pig? And so the hedonists found a major stumbling block in their thought process until John Stuart Mill in early 19th century came around and tried to sort of make it seem a little bit more palatable by saying, look, us humans, we're nothing like swine, we're nothing like pigs, because we don't just have pleasures, we have lower pleasures and we have higher pleasures. So lower pleasures would be things like wanting to eat chocolate cake all day long, wanting to game all day long, but higher pleasures would be things like obtaining pleasure from reading a book, for example. And so you wound up with the qualitative hedonism of Mill versus the quantitative hedonism of Bentham. Then in the 20th century, hedonism was dealt a major blow by a Harvard philosopher called Robert Nozick. Now, Nozick came up with this thought experiment of an experience machine. So he said, let's imagine that there is a machine where you input into it exactly what you find pleasurable. So meat, chocolate, reading, etc. I input all that into this experience machine, and then I hook myself up to this machine, and it's kind of like virtual reality. So all I will experience through this experience machine is things that will give me pleasure. And I am not aware that I've hooked up to this machine once I've hooked up to it, and life goes on in the outside world. And he found that almost no one would be willing to hook up to this experience machine. So would you rather be playing volleyball, or would you rather be imagining yourself playing volleyball? And he said, based on this thought experiment, pleasure is not the only thing that contributes to our well-being. We are wanting to experience other things. We are choosing to watch a sad movie, for example. We are choosing to want to see people and to help them through their hardship and to cry with them and laugh with them and all that sort of thing. Then there was Aristotle. Aristotle had the idea that everything in nature had a purpose. So everything in nature had what's called a telos, which is an end goal. And because humans are part of nature, then humans also have an end goal or an ultimate purpose. And so what is the purpose of humans? The purpose of humans is to reach the ideal human form. Aristotle thought that wealth, obtaining honor, and satisfying bodily pleasures are not the ultimate good. These are the life fit for cattle. There is a lot of cattle symbolism going around, obviously. And he said the good life constitutes two things. So the good life constitutes, number one, the acquisition of intellectual virtues. So contemplating, thinking, experimenting, and we acquire this through learning and experimentation. The other, so intellectual virtues, the second was character virtues. And these are things like courage, generosity, temperance, and these are acquired through habituation and through life experiences. And the way he described obtaining character virtues is by aiming for what's called the golden mean. So if we think of the virtue as being in the center of the balance, then we are trying to avoid the two extremes of the balance, the two vices. So the excess vice and the deficiency vice. So for example, in the if we have cowardly on like the deficiency side, then we would have rash on the other side, and the golden mean of that is just being courageous. Okay? And so Aristotle thought that these innate moral virtues are learnt. They're not something that we already know, so they are learnt. They are something we choose to do, and we perfect them by aiming for this golden mean. And we also are able to get a better idea of what they ought to be by having what he called moral exemplars. So people that exhibit these virtues that we are able to emulate. And so put together, I don't know where my mouse has gone, there it is. So put together, the intellectual virtues and the moral virtues combined will give us what's called, so non-Greeks call this eudaimonia, but Greeks call it eudaimonia. And what eudaimonia has been translated as is happiness, but really I like the translation of human flourishing. So Aristotle thought that that intellectual virtues and moral virtues put together will give us the end result of eudaimonia, which is the human flourishing. Now, a virtuous life is one that is lived according to its purpose. If we remember, he said that everything has a purpose. And human excellence is when we act in accordance to our purpose and the highest virtues. And so eudaimonia is activity of the soul in conformity with the best virtues. And eudaimonia is when the human reaches his or her highest potential. Now, I was inspired by this quote, which is speaking kind of to a similar tune. This is by Viktor Frankl, who is a psychiatrist and a philosopher who survived the Holocaust camps. And he says, happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to, he says person, but I like being, other than oneself. And I thought this was more in keeping with what Aristotle was kind of trying to say, but no, I do not feel that Aristotle had the full sort of picture. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that there are only two paths in life for people. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فإن لم يستجيبوا لك فاعلم أنما يتبعون أهواءهم. So, if they do not answer you, then know that they only follow their low desires. And so there are only two paths. The path of answering the call, يستجيبوا لك, or the path of following their desires, يتبعون أهواءهم. And it's so beautiful and non-coincidental that the word for desires or whims is hawa, or the plural ahwa. And the symbolism there is magical. It signifies that these pleasures and fleeting whims are just like the wind. A minute they're there, and the next minute they're not. They're completely vanished. And so they are constantly a moving target. And seeking to attain bodily pleasures is that, just that, as a constantly moving target. I want a car, I get the car, and a month later, I want another car. Never satisfied. So, interestingly, in the Holy Quran, the word happiness is only mentioned once. And it is in this ayah, فَلْيَفْرَحُوا. And farah is ultimate happiness. It's rejoicing. Okay? يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ موعظة من ربكم وشفاء لما في الصدور وهدى ورحمة للمؤمنين. قل بفضل الله وبرحمته فبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون. O mankind, there has certainly come to you an advice from your Lord and a cure for what is in the breasts, and a guidance and mercy for the faithful. Say in Allah's grace and in His mercy, let them rejoice in that it is better than what they amass. And it is incredible, and again, no coincidence, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to use this word to describe His advice to the ails in the heart, the guidance to our loss, the Holy Quran, as the ultimate happiness, farah, the rejoicing. For no manual, no amount of philosophical pondering or reflecting will come anywhere near the clarity and the guidance of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so where can we find a summary for the good life? Well, let's take a look. The ayah we're going to be looking at is ayah 177 in Surah Al-Baqarah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وأتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرون في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. I intentionally stopped where I stopped. It is not bir. I'm not defining bir yet. I found lots of Quranic translations, but I'm going to leave it as bir here. It is not bir that you turn your faces towards the east and the west, but bir is that one should believe in Allah and the last day and the angels and the book and the prophets, and give away wealth out of love for him to the near of kin and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarer and those who ask, and for those who are enshackled. And when they make a promise, they keep their promise, and the patient in distress and affliction and in times of conflict. These are those who are true and those who guard themselves. So we begin with bir. Bir ultimately translates to goodness. So this ayah was revealed when the Qibla was changed from Jerusalem towards Mecca, and there was a lot of brouhaha between the Muslims, those who felt like they were betraying Jerusalem by changing and all this sort of business. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling them, look, you are looking at the nitty-gritty of the goodness of which direction you should be facing, but goodness is more than that. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then gives an entire list of what this goodness is. And so goodness is not just turning to the east or the west. Note here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say the good person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intentionally said the goodness. And it's as if Allah wa ta'ala, by using the masdar of the goodness, He is saying that this is the ultimate good. So, when somebody is just so good, we say, oh, Muhammad is goodness, We're not saying that he is, we're not, we know grammar. We know that's not grammatically correct. But what we're trying to imply is that Muhammad is so good, it is impossible for anything bad to come out of Muhammad, right? And so Allah here is saying, look, here you will find the manifestation of goodness itself, okay? But then he goes on to describe a person and what they would do. So, bir, we said, means goodness, but it also comes from the word bar, and bar means land, dry land, and it is in contrast to bahr, which is obviously sea. And the symbolism there is that the sea is turbulent and uncertain, whereas bar, land, solid land, is firm and stable and certain and permanent. And it kind of mirrors or equals the symbolism in Surah Al-Asr, where the human is depicted in drowning in his own loss. It's also a way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that what is about to be discussed is intended to be stable, it's intended to be concrete, it's intended to be permanent in nature. These are permanent, concrete attributes and states of being, okay? And so, if we begin to look at this description by considering a building. So we look at the building and we find that the building does not begin from the ground up, but in fact begins from underground. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divides up goodness, the package of goodness, into 4 levels. The first is beliefs. The second level is virtues. The level above that then comes acts of worship. And then finally, what I've labeled as validity or invalidity. We will explain further when we get to that point. And so let's begin right at the very bottom. This is the foundation, the beliefs. This is what the rest of the building will rest on. And a shaky foundation will result in an unstable building, and a very solid foundation will result in a sturdy building that will stand the test of time and will stand to weather the storms. So what is the foundation of goodness? It is beliefs. And beliefs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then begins to list. First, man amana billahi, believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this doesn't mean that you can't be good if you do not believe in Allah, but rather that goodness is incomplete without the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Example of that would be, you're in a group and you are extra good to one person, but you seem to ignore everything else or everyone else in the group. You are good in an aspect, but you're not holistically good. The ayah is also saying that the first and foremost reason to be good is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Next, وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. And if one believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His justice, then it is automatic that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the just, would have a divine purpose, and hence there is Judgment Day. And this is another motivation to be good. Some people are good because they want to go to Jannah. Other people are good because they don't want to go to hellfire. And so these are valid reasons too to be good. And in fact, these are stages of Iman that most of us begin in. And in fact, most of the companions of the Prophet, you know, at the very beginnings of Islam, would come over and say, I understand that there's a Judgment Day. How do I avoid the hellfire? Tell me how to avoid it. Okay? And so although Imam Ali describes different states or stations of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either fearing hellfire or wanting the rewards of Jannah, or the ultimate, which is for God Himself, because He is worthy of being worshipped. These are all motivations for being good. And وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ وَالْكِتَابِ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ. Now these three put together are actually a whole package. They describe the message. So the angels give the book to the prophets, and the prophets give us all of that in the package of a message. And the message tells us what it means to be good beyond what our innate nature would say so. And so I may know that it is good not to murder, but I may not know that it is good to give a certain percentage of my earnings, for example. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The Prophet indeed was a messenger in whom we found example. And if we remember back, Aristotle, one of the ways he told us that we attain moral virtues is by having an exemplar to follow. Interesting. And so the message put together constitutes the final part of the beliefs. So this is the foundation. These are, in fact, usul al-din, as we describe them. And they are hidden. They are required to arrive at, we're required as Muslims to arrive at these using our intellect. We're not allowed to say, that, oh, I believe in usul al-din because my father said so. We are required to ponder and actually come up with these. And so there is, in beliefs, there is a spiritual component, but actually an intellectual component as well. And if we don't have that intellectual component, if we've not gone through the thought process ourselves, then we might find ourselves, let's say, in university, or being exposed to philosophers such as Epicurus, and we might think that hedonism might be a good thing, or if we look at it the way John Stuart Mill put it, which is that we have lower pleasures and higher pleasures, for example. And so it is crucial that these foundations come through the intellect, but they're also very strong, because this is where the building will now begin to be built. And so we've got our foundations. Our first level above the foundations are the virtues. And the virtues begin with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, وَأَتَى الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ. Now, Tafsir says that it could mean two different things. So it could mean that people give away from their wealth because of their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is one possibility. And the other possibility, and it's very plausible, is that they give out of their wealth despite their love for money. And really, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acknowledging that we are humans and there is invariably a love for money because we have given up time in order to earn that money. And time is our most valued commodity. Okay? And so although it, doesn't sound great that we love money, we value the commodity that got us there, and then it's a choice up to us how we choose to spend that money. And so it's a conscious decision of where that wealth will go. So, أَتَى الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ. And then he describes categories of people. And the first and foremost in that group is ذَوِي الْقُرْبَى, and it is those who are near us, or either near us in relation or near us in proximity, but most tafsir say that it's actually those who are your kin folks, so your own family. And sadly, we find that often the biggest tensions in people's lives are dramas that occur amongst family members. And this commandment is designed so as to force one to look beyond that and go against one's own inherent nature of wanting to spite one's family member that, wronged us or said the wrong thing or did the wrong whatever. It's designed to get rid of that, but it's also designed to ensure strong family ties within Islam. You need to be close to your family members in order to know that a particular cousin is going through a difficult time, or a particular aunt is going through a really rough patch. Without the strong family ties, you wouldn't know that. And it's also an acknowledgement that strong family ties are actually foundational and very crucial to Iman. The next group of people that are mentioned are the yatama, the orphans. And really, we need to be involved in the community so as to know who is an orphan. Because invariably, if we are deeply involved in a community, we would have attended the funeral of somebody's father or the funeral of somebody's mother for us to know that that particular person is an orphan, and for us to check up on them. And so in the first one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was focusing on inside the family, the strong bonds inside the family. Here it is talking about families knowing other families. وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. Now this is a group of people. It doesn't mean the poor, actually. It comes from the word sakana, and sakana is implying someone who is stuck in a particular situation. So it's a situation that they can't get out of. It could be a health problem that they found themselves in that's going to be chronic. It could be an abusive relationship they can't seem to get out of. It could be an immigration issue that they can't resolve. And again, you would need to know the community well in order to find out who is a miskin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elsewhere in the Quran actually says the ignorant one would look at these group of people, and because they seem to be all right, would think that they're absolutely fine. But if you were in tune with your fellow Muslim, then it would be simple mannerisms and facial expressions that you would be able to pick up and know that this person is not quite right. You know, what we call non-verbal behaviors. You would be able to pick up on those intricacies by being closely knit as a community. And the next category is Ibn Sabil, and it literally means son of the path. And these would be travelers, somebody who's come from afar and has no one here. If we were, again, familiar with our community, we would know when somebody doesn't look like they've ever been here before. I remember when we first came here, and this was 10 years ago, we just hit our 10-year mark, 10-year anniversary, and we went to one of the centers because we knew absolutely no one. We thought, okay, let's go to a center, this way we get to know people. And I had 2 small children, and the third one in my belly, and I sat next to a lady, and she was awesome. You know, she picked up that I was new, I'd never been there, etc. But she was very young. And as the end of the program came to, as we came to the end of the program, she goes, oh, let me introduce you to my mother. And I went up to her mother, she introduced me, and she said, oh, welcome, it's lovely to meet you, etc. Oh, I've got a program tomorrow at my house. Too bad you live far away. You won't be able to come. And I thought, oh, darn it all. You know, there was an opportunity for me to be able to attend this, tightly knit group and be able to meet more people. But this lady decided that I lived too far away. So anyway, at least I was recognized as Ibn Sabil at the time. Next group is Wasa'ilin, and it's very interesting to see that Sa'ilin are literally people who ask for help. And you would think that the first person you want to help is actually the person that asks for help. But the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put it all the way this far down in the list is because if we did the top part properly, there shouldn't be anybody in a state of needing to ask, because they would have fallen in the majority of the previous categories. So for them to be reaching a point where they have to ask, this is like the last resort, and whoops, we didn't pay attention. Were they a miskin that had, a facial expression that we didn't notice? If we had asked them, maybe we found out they were just diagnosed with something terrible and they won't be able to work again. And so wasa'ilin, and finally wafir riqab, and this is people who are imprisoned, who are shackled, and it's not necessarily somebody who is actually in prison, but in today's society it could be somebody who's shackled to, let's say, a job they can't get out of, but it's actually not a job that's paying a living wage. So, I knew somebody who, because of her circumstances, was forced to work, but couldn't get a legitimate job. So she had to work for this Muslim veggie grocer who decided to pay her $9 or $10 an hour, and said that he would pay her at the end of each week. And so she got to the end of the week, and he would just sort of drip feed the money to her. One day he'd give her $100, the next day he'd give her $20, and it was abusing this person. But she is an example of somebody who's wafir raqab, for example. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that these are the virtues here of giving away to these people. And so we've covered the foundation, the virtues. The next level comes acts of worship. And so note that these, which seems like almost every lecture you listen to or every advice you get, is about acts of worship. How to pray, how many drops of water to use for your wudu, is this ghusl right? Is this direction correct? The nitty-gritty of the acts of worship, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to put it after beliefs and after virtues. And that in itself is telling. And so acts of worship are designed to be things that help orientate us to the right path. And so the very first one, وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةِ. And salah, by its very nature, being 5 times a day, requires us to repeatedly come back and face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we go off and work, or we go off and study, and we've got to come back and pray and face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We go off to work again, or study, or whatever it is, and come back and reorientate ourselves. And so these are opportunities where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps to guide us through the bumps on the road of everyday life. And so if we find that we've strayed, then coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through salah will hopefully, through time, or even through that one particular faridah, reorientate us towards the correct path. And وَأَتَى الزَّكَاةِ. And zakah basically means purifying one's money. And so you give a certain percentage of it so that the rest of it becomes halal for you to use. And up until this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used the singular. He's used the singular to describe all these commandments. But all of a sudden, وَالْمَوْفُونَ بِعَهْدٍ إِذَا عَاهَدُوا, he's gone plural. And this is because these are things that wouldn't necessarily have an impact if only one person was doing them. So for example, we, by obtaining our driver's license, we have signed up to say, I will abide by all traffic laws. If I was the only one abiding by these traffic laws, there would be chaos out there. But by everyone abiding, you have peace and tranquility most of the time on the roads. And so these are people who give promises and keep their promises. I promised I would abide by the traffic laws. I will abide by the traffic laws. A couple of weeks ago, first thing in the morning on a Monday, I'm going down the road towards my first aged care facility, and there's a highway patrol in one of the roads off to the left, and there were cars in front of me, cars behind me. He points at me and he says, uh-oh, what's going on? Is my headlight burned? Have one of my headlights has gone off? It must be my headlight. I've not done anything else. So I turned into a road, a little street actually, rolled down my window, like, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, what's going on? He's got the breathalyzer thingamabob. It wouldn't work, so they couldn't breathalyze me. But anyway, he goes, what's the speed limit here? I said 60 kilometers an hour. He goes, right, but did you know, oh, you were doing 59. I'm like, oh, phew. He goes, but did you know that this was a school zone. And it's 8:30 a.m. Like, oh, is it? And he goes, yep, there was a sign right up the hill just before you passed. I'm like, I'm so sorry, officer, I actually did not see it, and I hadn't. He goes, well, driver's license. I gave it to him. He goes, are you in a hurry? I'm like, yeah, actually, I've got some flu vaccines here. They're going to go off if I don't give them. He goes, right, I'll send you your ticket home. 3 demerit points and $362. I'm like, thank you very much. So anyway, we do sign up to abide by traffic laws. Sometimes oopsies happen, but we do try to, stick to it. And so we've got the next level all sorted. What comes at the very pinnacle, the very top of this building? Now, have you heard of penthouses? So these swanky, high-rise buildings that are residential, so people have apartments there or flats. The very, very top of that building, oftentimes in these big cities like Melbourne or New York, that very top floor is actually one entire apartment or one entire flat. And these are called penthouses. And it's this penthouse that people use to market this building and to sell it to people and to say how swanky and fantastic and awesome and classy this building is. So the penthouse is a big deal. And this is the same in this symbolic building we've got here. The penthouse is a big deal. And what Allah has put in the penthouse is was-sabirin. Now, we've spoken about virtues before, but this is like the creme de la creme, right? So, without these, then the last 3 levels we've talked about become invalidated, okay? And so, for those who are grammarians, are excited by Arabic grammar, and I'm sure not many of you are, but if you are, you may have noticed that what came before, I'll go back so you can see, what came before, وَالْمَوْفُونَ بِعَهْدِهِمْ مَوْفُونَ. So surely what comes now should be صَابِرُونَ. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَالصَّابِرِينَ. And in Arabic, instead of using the rafa' sort of version of the word, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used the nasab version of the word, and mufassirin say that this is what's called an-nasb ala sabil al-madh. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to emphasize the awesomeness of this so much, He's decided to turn grammar upside down in order for us to pay attention. So this is the bold, this is the underlined, this is the italicized, version of you better pay attention to this penthouse. Was-sabirina. So when are people sabirin? Firstly, a sabirin is wrongly translated as just patience. But sabirin encompasses a lot more than that. It encompasses consistency, it encompasses perseverance, and it encompasses patience. So it doesn't mean doing the previous things once, or doing the previous things only when it suits us, or just randomly thinking, yeah, what I did is good enough. No, it's being consistent, doing the previous things we mentioned in the previous 3 levels, consistently persevering on them, and being patient despite the hardships. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالصَّابِرِينَ فِي الْبَأْسَ. These are going to be times where you will need to persevere, where you will need to be consistent, where you will need to be patient. فِي الْبَأْسَ. And ba'sa are times where it's hard society-wise. An example would be Islamophobia, for example. So it's hard to be a Muslim out there because there could be a lot of bullying, a lot of negativity, but despite all that, you persevere in your salah, you persevere in your hijab, you persevere in your giving to the the needy, even if they're not Muslim, etc. So Islamophobia is an example, but we're living in a particular societal hardship as we speak. The cost of living has almost overnight skyrocketed. Coles, if you go to Coles, a head of lettuce is $5, but I read yesterday that it's $12 somewhere in Queensland. Something that used to cost $1 or $2. That's just an example of what's happening. If we go to refuel our car, that's just, like glaring example of the skyrocketing expenses of living. And so those are examples of Ba'sa. Us persevering through these despite these major generalized hardships. Dharra is personal hardships. So an example of this would be a bereavement. An example of this would be Yusuf alayhi salam being taken away from his family and father and thrown into a well, or being sold off to slavery, or being accused of this and that and the other thing. Those are personal hardships. And so continuing to be virtuous, continuing to do acts of worship despite personal major hardships. I see this a lot in my patients. So a lot of patients, as they're approaching the end, those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are very accepting of what's happening. And they take it as it comes. And then you've got others. For example, I've got a patient who's alive and well herself. She's about 92 or 93, but her daughter-in-law just passed away a couple of days ago. And she was 68 and she passed away from a brain tumor. And all she could tell me the last few weeks, every time I see her, is, why is this happening? And this lady, unfortunately, does not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Adharra has hit her and it's thrown her sideways. She doesn't know what else to do. She doesn't know how else to go on with her life. It's completely sidetracked her. And you really see the two sides in life and in seeing people. And then finally, Wahin al-Bas. And Hin al-Bas describes actually the times of war. It's actually the chaos of war and the very midst of battle. And so being virtuous and doing all these goodnesses despite being in the middle of war. And some people in our day and age, in Ukraine, for example, are going through a war themselves, but where we are here in the comforts of Australia, this might manifest itself in our lives as tests and trials and tribulations in our health, in our wealth, and in our family. And so this this summary of the foundation, of beliefs, the virtues, the acts of worship, and then the ultimate validation or invalidation of these bottom three levels is goodness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends this ayah by saying, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا. Now we all proclaim La ilaha illallah. Even Muawiyah proclaimed La ilaha illallah. But do we really mean that in the depths of our heart? This is the manual. This is a checklist. It's a checklist against which I can constantly check myself against. Am I genuine? Am I genuinely being good? Am I a true believer or am I a hypocrite? وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُتَّقُونَ. And muttaqun are those who are protected. They are completely shielded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make us of those who are completely shielded by His mercy. And so this bir, this goodness, have I got my beliefs firm? Are my beliefs firm? Do I possess immaculate virtues? Am I dedicated to my acts of worship? And am I consistent? Do I persevere? Am I patient during all the hurdles, all the challenges, and all the calamities? And so, remember that manual we wished for early on in the talk? Describing to us step by step how to attain the good life? Well, brothers and sisters, we've got it right in front of us, right in front of our very eyes. It is the Holy Quran. It is the ultimate divine manual. And so I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are able to always see the Quran for what it really is, the Furqan, the distinguisher between the good and the bad. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're all inspired to pursue the good life by strengthening our beliefs, by attaining and maintaining virtuous traits, by holding steadfast to our acts of worship, which strive to keep us in line with our ultimate goal, and by doing all of it as sabirin. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Dr. Sama, for this beautiful, enlightening journey from hedonism to these ideas regarding the spiritual penthouse by which we will reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, now we will have an interactive activity by the name of Lost at Sea, which will be facilitated by our good brother Muhammad al-Islam. Salawatu wa salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Trust my computer to shut down. Okay, it's doing a Windows update of all times. Not great. Let's see how much I remember. All right, I don't want to keep you up for too long, so we'll get straight into it. We wanted to do a fun little activity together called Lost at Sea. Sometimes this type of activity is done at work to teach people teamwork, leadership skills, things like that. I think these activities are also fun for us to do as a community because they teach you a lot about your own character, your own personality, your behavior, how you interact with people, how you work with people, and how we can influence each other's thoughts and beliefs as well. All right, computer's gone. Let's wing it. So basically, the story goes: you're out with your friends. You're on a yacht, and you're out on a holiday in the middle of the ocean. And then whatever, the engine blows up, fire breaks out. You have to jump off. It's capsized. You're on a life boat with your 3 friends, and you can only grab 15 items with you, and you basically, the activity is to think about those 15 items and think about what would be your priority from those 15 items if you want to survive? Okay? So the brother Amir and sister Sawa are giving out these worksheets that you're going to fill out. They have a list of those 15 items. Basically, you're just going to put a ranking of 1 to 15 next to each of the items according to what you think as an individual is your top priority. For example, if the chocolate bar is the top priority, you're going to put number 1 next to it. If the bottle of rum is your lowest priority, you're going to put 15 next to it. Remember, your goal is survival, okay? I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that, so get straight into it. Read those 15 items. Think about survival. Jot down 1 to 15.
So did you want to re-emphasize on the instructions again?
Yes.
Are we going through step 1?
What's step 1?
Individual
Yes, individual ranking, yes. You're filling out individual ranking column. Don't worry about the other columns for now. My computer's back. Don't ask each other for help just yet. You've got to figure it out on your own. You'll get into groups in a second. All right, you're about to die, guys. You're on this boat. You need to wait it out to get help. You've got these 15 items. What's your priority from these 15 items? What's your top on your list? What's the lowest on your list? Don't overthink the situation. You've got 15 items. It's come to my attention that people don't know what a sextant is. It's a navigational device. It's like a thing that they use to measure angle between, like, I don't know, the moon and something else. And they use it in navigation.
Brother, are we in the Atlantic Ocean on the map?
You're in the middle of an ocean, and you're very far from nearby civilization. To give you a bit more context.
This is map in the Atlantic Ocean?
I don't know. Do you know where you are? That's the question. Maybe you don't know where you are. To answer your question, yes, you're in the Atlantic Ocean. Not that it makes a difference. All right, how are we going? Is everyone finished? Shout if you're not finished. Come on, guys, you're gonna die. Hurry up.
No, that attitude.
I'm joking, you're not going to die. But we'll give you a few more minutes.
Okay.
نعم نخافك مسكينة
The ladies' side look like they're finished. Yes? Men's side, you guys finished? All right. Everyone's got their own answers. Now, the second part of this, Salah ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. All right, second part of this is you're going to get into groups. And then as a group, you're going to discuss together what you think is the proper ranking. So you're going to, as a group, on the second column now, like collectively agree on what your ranking should be. So you're going to share ideas, and you're going to put together one ranking for your group. All right? Let's do this group thing straight. Sabah, can you just go around the sister's side and just give them like a number from 1 to 6 randomly? And I'll do the men's side. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. Remember your number. 1, 2, 3.
هذا عنيف.